Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and welcome back to Goosejunkies. Tonight for episode 25, which is a milestone episode for this podcast, we have decided to do something special, and we're going to talk about two movies that we've been dying to cover since day one of this podcast. And we're going to be going over Goosebumps 2015, and we're going to be facing it off against Jumanji from 1995. Tonight, we are a two-man show because one of our other panelists, Micah, the ultimate Goosebumps man, is on vacation. And then Spongy, he has been absent from the podcast, at least on camera for a while due to some personal things. But Spongy will, of course, have some things written for us to talk about. Micah decided to sit this one out, but we do have some thoughts that he mentioned earlier that we'll be sharing for tonight's episode. You already know who I am, so if you don't know who my panelist here is, you definitely need to go check him out. The Horror Tavern. He goes by BD. How you doing tonight, BD?
Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night. It is the future Hall of Famer. It's the man who drops panties faster than antimatter on a tightrope. It's your boy. My name's BD. I'm excited for it today because, again, this has been a hyped up concept. We've talked about Goosebumps 2015 in the past, but we've never compared it against the original Jumanji 1995 because they both have similar formulas. So I'm excited because Jumanji was a movie that I saw as a kid, but I didn't touch it for many, many years. So I actually got to experience it for the first time in a long time. And Goosebumps 2015, I watched for the first time several months ago, and rewatching it again, it's interesting to see how it fares on a rewatch. So I'm excited to compare these two.
Yeah, and we also get to, um, discuss maybe the legacy of Jumanji and how it's impacted film later on. But we'll get into that later because we have a lot to go over in this episode. Even though it's only two movies, we do have a lot to say. So to start everyone off, I guess we're going to get right into it. We're going to take Goosebumps 2015 first for this podcast, and the reason why we're doing this is to we want to look at what is the most recent example, or at least the most popular example of this comparison we're going to be drawing throughout the podcast, and we're doing so also because it's Goosebumps, and this is mainly a kids horror podcast, and most people would think that this is more true to kids horror than something like Jumanji, which you could argue, but we'll get into that shortly. I'm gonna pass it over to you, BD, first. Okay, so why don't you discuss what Goosebumps 2015 has to offer, what it's about, what's your thoughts on it, all of that.
So Goosebumps 2015, as many of you that are fellow Goosebumps fans know, is probably, in my opinion, arguably one of the most famous pieces of kids horror media to ever drop. Because if you go on YouTube, clips of Goosebumps 2015, some of them have like 500 plus million views, 11 million views. It was very, very popular, a smash hit. And it was pretty divisive in the community because you had people who absolutely loved the movie and you had people who kind of felt more average and decent on it. So you got the two sides of the fandom there. But nonetheless, I will admit, it's a very iconic movie and it did bring in a lot of new Goosebumps fans. So just for that, that's huge. The fact that we were able to build up the community off of this movie. So for those of you who have not seen the movie, or it's been a while and you need a refresher, the movie takes place in, I believe, Delaware, because you follow a family of a single mother and her son who's entering high school. The son is named Zach, and he's played by Dylan Mignette, who, if those of you who don't recognize Dylan Mignette, he actually starred in quite a bit of stuff, especially the most famous role to this Goosebumps role would be Haunting Hour, because Haunting Hour was tied to R.L. Stein's name. He was in Brush with Madness as the main character, so he's a recognizable face in kids' horror. You also got Ryan Lee, who's in this movie. I don't remember. Was he an imaginary best friend in Haunting Hour? I think he might have been the protagonist there, if I remember. Or maybe
Yeah,
I'm
I
getting
think
it
so. Yeah.
wrong. So he has Haunting Hour ties as well. So you got two Haunting Hour brothers there. Also, if you're old school like me in comp, you know Ryan Lee was actually in the Titanium music video. So he's famous off that too. So he's in this. And obviously you got the most famous role. You got Jack Black. Jack Black is in this movie as well. So Zach is essentially a kid who moved from New York City. His father, I believe, was a police officer who ended up dying. So his mother and him move to Delaware, and his mother's going to be the new vice principal of this local high school. So he feels a little bit embarrassed by that. He has to move into a new town. You got that typical stuff where you don't know anybody, you abandon your whole old life for this new life, and now your mom's going to be a part of your high school. So he thinks that it's not going to be off to a good start. And as he starts basically exploring the town, he meets his neighbor. His neighbor is this very pretty girl in his eyes named Hannah. You get the sense that he might have an attraction towards her, and she has an eccentric dad, a dad who's very overprotective. He's sort of a recluse. You find out that he's actually R.L. Stein. R.L. Stein is the dad of his neighbor, and he ends up meeting Ryan Lee, played as Champ, at the high school. And Champ is sort of your typical nerdy underdog character. He's sort of awkward. He's charismatic and funny, but he's not very popular. So he tries to become friends with Zach right away. And as the story progresses, Zach and Hannah sort of form a connection together. They go to this abandoned amusement park and they sort of try to become boyfriend and girlfriend slowly. But eventually, he ends up getting cock blocked by Ryan R.L. Stein, the dad. And then one night, when Champ is coming over because they're about to get ready for this like upcoming dance at the high school, they have a really weird experience because they hear Hannah arguing with her father upstairs in the house from like an open window, and then next thing you know, they hear her scream and they hear a door slam and they suspect that maybe R.L. Stein might be like hinted to be like an abusive father. He might be maybe, hurting his daughter. He might be locking her up and she's not able to escape. So they feel worried for her safety. So Zach ends up calling the police. The police come there. R.L. Stein basically shoos them off. They're not able to do anything without a warrant. They also got some comedic stuff going on. It's sort of your typical comedic cop duo. So there's not much else they can do. And then Zach comes up with the idea, well, let's break into R.L. Stein's house and get Hannah out of there, because if she's in danger and nobody believes us, we might be the only ones who can save her. And when they break into the house, they notice there's some weird stuff because they go into the cellar and there's bear traps and all these contraptions laid around in this Home Alone style, as if R.L. Stein is protecting something, and they think, well, maybe he's just paranoid about locking up the daughter. And when they break into the house, they go into R.L. Stein's office, and there's all these books, which are the Goosebumps books, which is an established famous book franchise because Champ recognizes all the books. He says he read them as a kid, that they scared the life out of him. And when Hannah comes out into the den, they're like, yo, we thought you were locked up. And she's like, no, 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 I was okay. What are you guys doing in the house? And they're like, well, we thought you were in danger. And she basically tries to get rid of them before her dad comes back because they'll be in big trouble. And next thing you know, a book opens up. And when that book opens up, pandemonium starts going because there's a creature that starts emerging out of the book, which ends up being this abominable snowman of Pasadena. This giant 8 foot tall Yeti starts coming out of the book, breaks out of the house, starts wreaking havoc. They have to go chase after it and try to stop it. And when they eventually come back to the house, R.L. Stein finds out about all the stuff they did. You get some lore reveals that Stein may have the power to bring creatures to life with his imagination, and that's why his books were so effective, and that's why he had to end up locking them away. And next thing you know, a certain famous figure called Slappy ends up releasing all the books, and now there's monster mayhem across the suburb town, and they have to find a way to stop Slappy, to get the books back in order to save the integrity of all the population. And that's essentially the plot of the movie. So, what are my overall thoughts about the movie? I'd probably give this movie a 7.5 out of 10. I think it's a pretty good movie and it's a fun time, especially if you're watching it for the first time. There's some good parts about the film that I actually enjoyed. The CGI is pretty good in certain places. I would say that the Abominable Snowman of Pasadena had some good CGI. There's a scene with a giant praying mantis, which is taken from the cover of A Shocker on Shock Street. Although that's not an actual monster in the book, seeing this giant kaiju praying mantis wreaking havoc in the town was actually pretty cool because it does pose a serious threat. It tears up vehicles, it chases after them. The thing can fly, which is horrific. Anytime a bug can fly and you don't expect it to, that's like your worst nightmare, let alone it's like 70 feet tall. So this thing is pretty crazy. Slappy does pose a prominent threat throughout the movie. I mean, he gains extra powers like super speed, and he's a lot smarter than you would expect him to be. So he's a pretty prominent threat. He's got some cool gimmicks in there, like he rides around in the haunted car, so that's a pretty cool thing. He's got a convertible whip. He's throwing out books, wreaking out havoc. You got the Lawn Gnomes. Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes is one of like my least favorite books in the OG 62, but I gotta give some respect in this movie because they're actually pretty cool. They got this whole scene where they're essentially in a kitchen and they're violent. They throw knives at the main characters. They basically try strangling Zach. They put like a piece of cloth tied up and try choking him out. They try tying up Arlstein and putting him inside of the oven, so they're about to cook him alive. And when they start basically breaking apart the gnomes, they start reforming. So these things are invincible. So I actually like the fact that the movie made him a big threat. They made him really enjoyable. That might have swayed some people's opinions about the book who've not read the book in a long time and they think that the gnomes in the movie are like the gnomes in the book. No, they're completely different. The movie took its own liberties and made it better. So I like all that stuff. And the main characters, for the most part, although they are generic, they don't really got much to them. They are charming in their performances. I think Ryan Lee as Champ is funny. He's got some pretty good lines. He's got that typical awkward charm to him as this unpopular kid. And he's got a scene where he faces off against the werewolf of Fever Swamp. And he basically has silver fillings in his mouth with teeth. So obviously he bites the werewolf. The werewolf gets hurt. And next thing you know, he manages to land a kiss with one of the hottest girls in the school, despite having werewolf hair all throughout his teeth. So shout out to my boy. He got some W's this movie. Zach is pretty generic, but he's a typical good character. I like Dylan Mignette, so he has a good performance. And honestly, the best character is Hannah because Hannah has a twist to her character that I'm not going to reveal because it's very easy to spoil. But let's just say Hannah has certain ties to a Goosebumps book that gets revealed later on that actually adds some layers to her character. It makes you rethink about certain stuff and makes her more compelling, makes you root for her, and it makes you want Zach and her to basically get together more. So those are positives. Um, but I won't lie. The movie, aside from being fun, aside from having good monster stuff at certain points and having good characters, there are negatives to it. And the negatives I'd have to start off with is surprisingly Jack Black as Arlstein, which is a hot take. That's a big hot take because a lot of people love Jack Black as Arlstein. They think he did a great job. I love Jack Black. I think he's a great actor. I love him in a lot of different performances he has. But in this movie, R.L. Stein sort of fell flat as a character for me because he's always playing the grumpy old man. He's always angry, and a lot of his jokes sort of fall flat. Where like Champ's character has funny moments. There's some funny interaction scenes between the monsters and the characters. But R.L. Stein's honestly not that funny. A lot of his stuff just comes off as him being bitter and angry all the time, and he's very one dimensional. You'd figure that R.L. Stein, being the guy who brought these monsters to life, would have a compelling character to him, but he really doesn't. He's sort of a one note pony, and he doesn't really do much for the movie. And honestly, by the end of the movie, I just sort of wanted R.L. Stein gone, which is not what should be in a Goosebumps movie because R.L. Stein in real life, he's a funny, charming guy. He's got some good thoughts to him, he's got some layers to him in real life. So I thought you could at least take that over into the movie, especially when R.L. Stein himself cameos in the movie. He plays, I think, Mr. Black in the school. So I don't know why they didn't just ask him for some pointers. I don't think he cared much, but as a viewer, I just thought it was sort of a missed opportunity. And the monsters, they have some rough moments, y'all. Listen, there's good moments with the monsters, and then there's bad moments. One of them is the abominable snowman of Pasadena. He has good CGI. He is 8 foot tall Yeti. I love Yetis, one of my favorite cryptids. He's an idiot. He's a bumbling idiot who gets a lot of slapstick stuff involving the scenes he's in. There's a scene at a hockey ring where basically he's like trying to chase after a Zamboni. He gets like knocked into like a hockey goal. He slams into the glass on the side, even though the glass is like 5 feet tall and he's 8 feet tall. So he literally slams into the glass, gets knocked out, and then when he gets up, he realizes, oh shit, I'm taller than the glass, and then reaches over. He's a real bumbling idiot. There's not really much threat level. I haven't read the Abominable Snowman book, but in terms of the movie, it just felt like they went down a comedic route, which is okay, but it feels lazy at certain points, especially when you can make it creepier. You got the body squeezers in the movie, and they are not just a side character. They appear more than once, and Jesus Christ, what they did to the body squeezers is a war crime. I mean, The design of the body squeezers from Tim Jacobus cover is amazing. They're like these frog amphibious aliens, and they actually got a scene that very much is similar to A Quiet Place, where they fell down from meteors and stuff, and they take over. Here in this movie, they look like characters out of SpongeBob. They look like that one scene from SpongeBob where Gary was like in a distant future and he had the cloak on and the bowl over his head. They look like Gary from SpongeBob when was in that distant future. I mean, they look goofy and they got these freeze rays that just sort of do your typical old alien stuff. So they weren't that impressive. And every other monster in the movie, you won't even recognize because they are side fodder. They're in the background. They don't have any prominent role. You got a clown, which I think is from A Clown Street. Doesn't really do anything. You got graveyard ghouls who appear in one gag scene where Stein's like, "It's Attack of the Graveyard Ghouls!" Ding, ding, ding. Oh, we did the reference. There's no zombies in Graveyard Ghouls. That's not what the plot is about. I don't know why he said that. I thought there were supposed to be Darkfall citizens. Apparently not. Whatever. You got monsters from Give Yourself Goosebumps that you would think the movie would give them more light because these are Give Yourself Goosebumps monsters. They don't get much highlights in terms of the book series because Give Yourself Goosebumps has a ton of throwaway monsters. You would think that maybe they gave them some more shine here. No, they all fade into the background. And there's basically hundreds of monsters in this movie that you won't even know are in the movie unless you go to the wiki page and you look up what monsters are in Goosebumps 2015. Oh shit, look, it's the Scarecrow. He was in that one tiny frame in the dark background on that baseball field. Good job, producers. Like, that sort of stuff. I'm being a bit cynical, but to be fair, considering the fact that we're watching a Goosebumps Jumanji movie, you think that they would pick better monsters. You think that they would do better shine on the monsters instead of doing a giant monster mash dance. And the worst crime of this movie is the haunted mask, because the haunted mask literally got cut out. It had a scene that got deleted, and we're not going to get into Goosebumps 2023, but this man, Rob Letterman, he does not like the haunted mask, y'all. He disrespects the haunted mask for no reason. Shout out to Completionist Shirt. So I'm mad about that as well. And the ending of the movie is sort of meh. I'm not gonna lie to you. The ending of the movie has a scene between Hannah and Zach that was actually kind of sweet. I thought it was a really good ending scene where it's sort of one of them losing each other, and it's sort of emotional, and it's sort of like a nice finale to the movie. And then that all gets swept under the rug because that character comes back for a happy-go-lucky kumbaya ending. So it's like, okay, what was the point of that fake out scene? You could have just cut it out and made him alive the whole time. It's whatever. So overall, I'd say the movie gets a 7.5. I mean, it's got positives to it. It's got good things, but then there's a lot of just generic stuff that you've seen in pretty much everything else. And as a Goosebumps fan, I think that actually detracts the score of the movie. Because if you didn't know anything about Goosebumps and you watch this movie as a blind viewer, you would think that it's a fun Jumanji spoof. But if you're a Goosebumps fan, there might be some expectations you had, which are reasonably fair, that don't get met in the movie. And you think that some of the directions they took are sort of odd. So those are my thoughts about the movie. And oh yeah, as good as the CGI is, that werewolf in the shopping market, Jesus Christ, y'all, they should have turned out the lights on that shopping market because that werewolf had rough CGI, and the werewolf barked. The werewolf of Fever Swamp barks like a golden retriever, y'all. I don't know what they were cooking with that, but they didn't do him any justice. And that man started dragging his claws against the semi truck trailers like he was Death from the new Puss in Boots movie. You are not him. You got zero aura, bro. You cannot bark like a chihuahua and then expect me to take you as a threat, man. It is what it is. But those are my thoughts. Let me give it over to the big man because I know he's got his own thoughts as well.
Yeah, man, it's hard to follow up everything you just said there, but I'll try here. Um, Goosebumps 2015. All right, let's get the cat out the bag. It came out, in a time where I was an adult, right? And I've mentioned this in the past. I grew up with the Goosebumps books. I grew up with the '90s show. This was past my generation. This was, a couple generations. Like the most recent one, I think was like what, 2000, 13, 14. That's like what, Gen Alpha or whatever, or maybe like late 2000s. I feel like I missed. I'm not the target demographic for this to begin with, and I totally get it. I said it in our review when we did Goosebumps 2015 and Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween as a collab review. I get if you grew up with this movie or this was the first thing you ever got introduced with Goosebumps, I get how monumental that can be. But we're going back to the 90s on this, and yes, I am bringing 90s and early 2000s bias into this because let's face it, Goosebumps is something that was born in the 90s. So was the precursor to Goosebumps 2015, which was Jumanji 1995. I grew up with the heyday of kids horror. Okay, even though I was mainly getting into it near the tail end of that, I was still immersed in it. I have clear memories of what it was like to be in the golden age of kids horror. I understand the magnitude of Jumanji. Jumanji had a cartoon spinoff. It was huge. It played on countless cable networks throughout the years growing up. It was a common movie kids watched. It was super popular. It made a crap ton of money in 1995 at the box office. It was a smash hit. And also, even to today's lens, given the tragedy of what happened to Robin Williams, a lot of people are starting to come around on Jumanji a whole lot more than what they used to, because in I guess in part due to the tragic passing of Robin Williams, they've revisited this movie and realized how good it actually is. So when Goosebumps 2015, now we're getting back to this, when this movie came out, I was like, this isn't Goosebumps to me. I don't need to see this. But when Goosebumps 2 was coming out, I was like, maybe I want to watch this before I watch Goosebumps 2. And I remember just kind of shrugging my shoulders with him, like, eh. And I remember distinctly thinking how close it was to Jumanji, right? But I've seen it now almost 10 times. I rewatched it, I think, for the 10th time for this podcast. I can say that on its own, Goosebumps 2015 is a fine movie to me, but that's my height I can give it. You know, maybe a light good. The issues I have are more pronounced than my positives. BD kind of already touched on a lot of them, but my main thing is how just generically written this movie is when it comes to this movie. When we boil it down, it's really a reskin of a formula we've already seen done in previous movies. And actually, after this movie, there's been a couple more like it as well. But it's about objects come to life in the real world. The cast of characters have to stop it, right? In terms of storytelling, this movie is just very basic. It's very chaotic and flashy. There's a lot of just roller coaster elements thrown in the story, ups and downs, constantly throwing you into pandemonium here, there, whatever. It doesn't take time to develop characters or set up good themes. And the themes that are there are really overdone in family movies. Like we have this coming of age storyline with the main character Zach, and no hard feelings to Dylan Minnette. He does a fine performance as Zach, but good God Almighty, is the you know sad boy main character archetype, kind of full blast in this, where he's moving to a new town, right? You've seen this in so many other movies. He has a widower or divorced mom, single mom raising him. Seen that in so many movies. He's interested in the girl next door who's probably out of his league, but he has this hero complex with her and he wants to prove himself. You've seen that in so many other movies, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s. And to top it all off, the whole how the movie unfolds and how it carries itself, you've seen in other family adventure movies. It's just a typical family adventure movie with a coming of age plot line with Goosebumps' skin. And it's just generic. It's just generic. And when we're getting down to the monster choices, even they picked the easiest monsters to make, if that makes any sense. Like they had a checklist, it seems like. We need a classical monster. Oh, let's pick a werewolf, not a vampire, because a werewolf you can CGI it. They wanted to pick a weird monster, so they picked the abominable snowman because he's a giant hulking brute that you can make silly, like BD brought up. So they wanted to use him for gag humor. The lawn gnomes are kind of cute and unsuspecting and quirky for the quirky crowd people. There's a checkbox there. You have the potty squeezers being the minions of Slappy, or helping them carry out this stuff. We need some sci-fi characters. Let's just pick the body squeezers because they're aliens. There's out of all the other aliens and Goosebumps, let's pick body squeezers. They have a graveyard scene. They pick the graveyard ghouls, but it's not the graveyard ghouls, but it is what it is. And then all the other monsters in the movie, besides like Slappy and the haunted car, which arguably get the most screen time next to the giant praying mantis, if I'm being honest, why are they even in the movie at that rate? Like you brought up, when you look on the wiki, you want to look up all the monsters that were in Goosebumps 2015. You have a little squint your eyes snapshot of a monster, like, oh, it's in this giant pile of monsters in the climax. They're in the movie. Does that really count? Does that no, it doesn't. And coming down to, just the overall execution, like we brought up with R.L. Stine being a meta character in the movie, I think he was poorly done. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think Jack Black was miscast as R.L. Stine. I know people love Jack Black as R.L. Stine. It's fine if you do, because I totally get it. If this was one of your first things that you ever experienced in Goosebumps, you're used to it. But to me, there's many other actors out there that I think plays R.L. Stine and are actual comedians like Jack Black that not only look like R.L. Stine more or maybe fit closer to his age, but I think encapsulate his personality better. And I don't know if it was the writing from the people behind the script, or maybe it was Jack Black, kind of putting whatever he thought was R.L. Stine into the character. I just don't buy that this is R.L. Stine personally. And like you said, BD, a lot of his jokes are running flat in this film. Even this time watching, nothing he said was really funny. And I think the implications are also kind of sketchy about making him implied to be like an abusive father, but all that gets recontextualized towards the back half of the movie with a reveal with a certain character. But even then, like, why is this in the movie? When you're talking about the first 20 minutes, even I have yet to see a movie bore me to pieces like Goosebumps 2015 does in its first 20 minutes. I'm telling you, there's nothing eventful going on to grip you in this film until the police come. And actually, after the police come and investigate this call that Zach's character has made, does the movie actually start to click on a little bit? But even then, you look at the characters and the character writing, the characters aren't written into the themes all that well, even though the themes are mostly finely presented. You know, you can't really get something out of the story that you can't get out of anything else that's out there generically put. You know what I mean? It's just kind of whatever. But execution wise, where it does count, I do like the fan service of the movie. I do think the soundtrack is nice. I do think that there's some funny humor from certain characters like Champ, Hannah, and Zach at moments of the story. I do think that they did take some liberties and actually made some stuff cooler, in my opinion. Like the blob they did everyone, that little tweak just by making them just instead of whatever the crap Tim Jacobus cover is, they made him like a literally like a blob monster that you would have seen in the 1950s. So you have a creature feature monster there. I like that aspect to it where it can swallow mass amounts of things, and it's a bit better done than the book. The law gnomes are a bit more intimidating than the book. Um, and yeah, I mean Slappy's probably the most well-known thing about this movie, and honestly, he's one of the better aspects of it as well. But I do feel like this is the time where Slappy is starting to become overused and definitely became like the mascot of Goosebumps. And I don't know if it's more hindsight of me disliking it more so than I used to, but given what we got after this, I can't watch 2015 in all sincerity and say, "Oh, this was a good move for this franchise." All said and done, because in my opinion, I don't think making Slappy the mascot was a good move. It just became watered down, and then it's just snowballed and snowballed and snowballed. And I think Rob Letterman, I think you're right on the money. He has a soft spot for Slappy, but loves to diss things like the Haunted Mask. And how can you have a Goosebumps movie where you promote lesser known villains that were hardly in the books or hardly ever talked about in the fan circuits, and you disregard Plant Brewer, the Dark Falls Denizens, Monster Blood, even. Where's the Say Cheese and Die camera? Where's the Haunted Mask? Where's all this stuff? It's nowhere. You got a praying mantis that wasn't in a book. You got the body squeezers from Series 2000. You have Fifi, the vampire poodle, who's barely even in Please Don't Feed the Vampire. If you've never read that book, hardly in the book, and now everybody puts this character on a pedestal. This is the kind of stuff I'm talking. Like it feels like they had a hat and they went into a boardroom and they were like, okay, we're going to draw 10 monsters out of this hat, and this is what's going to end up in the movie. And they picked a few you might recognize, and then a few just randos, and just rolled with it. It could have been way better than it was. That's all I'm going to say. I'd probably give the movie like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's fine. It's a fine movie.
Yeah, and to build off what you said too, I think that the point you made up actually reminded me of something similar I said during my old review, which was that I agree it feels more like a roller coaster ride than an actual movie because it feels very much like if you were inside of a roller coaster, you would imagine the stuff playing out in the action scenes of the movie, much like you would in like a Disney attraction where they got the holographic screen and stuff, because stuff happens so on the money that makes it generic. Like I remember, like there's so many Champ scenes in this movie. As much as I like Champ for what he has so many on the point generic scenes where it's like, all right, guys, we got to be really, really quiet. Don't make any sound, and then the dude will drop over a lamp, and then the abominable snowman's like, they're here. It's like, okay, that's on the cue. And then when he's in the shopping market and they're all hiding from the werewolf, it's like, all right, guys, don't make any noise. He opens up a soda bottle and it makes a fizz, and that werewolf tracks him. They do it twice in the movie. So there's so much generic stuff in there. And obviously, the dialogue, while it is funny, it's not really creative. It's sort of your generic, like, if you were playing a video game, this is the sort of video game dialogue you would get. To be fair, this is video game dialogue where they have pretty much the responses that you would expect. They take the action sequences that you would expect. When they do veer off, it is cool, like the lawn gnomes, the praying mantis, and that stuff. But outside of that, it's pretty much your similar stuff. Even like the scene where they're dancing at the dance, which honestly, that's the best part of the movie. The fact that they play "Yeah Yeah Yeah," "Dance Till You're Dead." That's an amazing song. But like the dude who's telling everybody, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it, nothing's going on," and then the mantis takes him out of the dance room. It's like, all right, that's also generic and stuff. So it's a good movie. I mean, it's a pretty good movie, and if some people want to say it's good, it's on them. But I can never really fully get behind it just because it feels like if you played a Goosebumps video game, this is sort of your generic stuff that you would get. But you're watching a movie, so you think that they would take the time to flesh out things, but they don't. So that sort of holds it back in a sense.
Yeah, I'm glad that you added that on. I just, I think me and you are closer, maybe even Spongy too about this. Do you want to go ahead and like read off what Spongy had to say? Were you able to get Micah's thoughts?
I don't think he brought up his thoughts. No, he only did for Jumanji. So I'll just
Okay,
read
but
Spongy.
we'll read Spongy's and then I can go off memory what Micah said.
Okay. All right, so here's Spongy's thoughts about 2015. He has quite a bit to cover as well. I imagine you'll cover a lot with this movie, so I'll keep things as simple as I can. I do have my own review from my blog from 2016, so if the viewers want more from me on it, they can go there. Anyway, I think the movie is in the good but not that good camp. Jack Black steals the show and has the funniest bits, but the other actors work well enough. Dylan Mignette doing another Stein thing after Haunting Hour was fun to see. The leads are basic but passable for what it is, and I like the aspect of Hannah being from the ghost next door, as it's the one time they use the book in a deeper way, even if they don't quite explain it well to those not familiar with the book. It's typical of the family movie with the cliche and some of the dumber jokes, and Hannah being brought back as a cop out. But on its own, there's nothing too wrong with it, and it provides some fun things that works as a throwback to things like, well, Jumanji, lol. The Danny Elfman score is good, and Slappy is a solid threat here compared to a lot of the books. On a Goosebumps level, you can tell they just wanted basic archetypes for the monsters and slapped random names on them, which is how we got things like these zombies being called graveyard ghouls. It feels like they didn't care, which is odd, as the original script, which you can find online, had some deeper cut references like the splatters and their defeat, which is credited to the same screenwriter. I smell exact meddling somewhere, probably. I generally don't care too much with this being Goosebumps after all, but it is worth noting. The vibe is more general comedy than horror or even camp, which is to be expected, I guess, but not what have I gone for. Even Stein said it could have been scarier. Lol, I didn't know that. That's a good point. As it is fair, but ideal Goosebumps product that at least brought more people to the series. And yeah, nothing but a great, and a fair but nothing but great family movie. So yeah, those are his thoughts. I do agree. I definitely think that Spongy brought up a lot of good points, especially like the fact that it does lean more into the comedy than the actual Goosebumps camp and horror, which you would expect from Goosebumps. Because that's why I did say, and Spongy's thoughts sort of remind me of like, well, it sort of reinforces what I said. Where if you didn't know anything about Goosebumps and you watched the movie, I would argue some of you would have a better time with it than if you actually knew about the Goosebumps franchise and you're a fan. Because again, you might have certain expectations. Even Stein admitted from Spongy's thoughts that he thought it would have been scarier. You might have certain expectations as a Goosebumps fan, which is going to happen because it's the first Goosebumps movie, and those might be thrown down the drain for some of you. So, yeah, I think Spongy was pretty much on the spot with a lot of things. Even if he differs, he made a lot of good points. So, shout out to his brief thoughts there.
Yeah, Spongy echoes a lot of similar thoughts I have about it. And I like the fact that he brought up that, you know, I don't know how to put this. I like the fact that he brought up that, Stein wanted this to be a scarier movie. And when you look at what the product was, it doesn't. He hit the nail on the head. Goosebumps is known for camp and horror, campy horror specifically, which can include humor. And don't get me wrong, having a comedy movie set around Goosebumps is kind of on brand, but the movie's missing that horror element, that focused horror element. It's just so laser focused on being an adventure flick that you lose sight of what the franchise is. And I've said it, and I've said this for many years now. I think 2015 and the people behind it who are also still attached to Goosebumps in some way today, somehow, they're making the 2023 show. They don't really still fully grasp what makes Goosebumps a popular IP to fans and what made it popular back in the day. They don't understand it. And I think you can see that early problem in 2015. They just don't understand how to correlate the books in the best way. And I also think they were out of touch. And I think Spongy kind of hinted at there was some studio meddling going on, possibly with more deep cut lore references for fans. They missed out on an opportunity there, not only because they picked rando monsters, but they should have promoted the hallmarks. Because if you introduce the hallmarks that are already bestsellers, all you're doing is enriching your own pockets at the same time, and people will get the references because 9 times out of 10, a kid probably read Stay Out of the Basement over something like, I don't know, Invasion of the Body Squeezers, or A Nightmare on Clown Street. Why are we having these monsters in the movie? Like, it's just a crapshoot of randomness. And I think Spongy's also on brand when he says that they probably picked the safest monsters because they fit a bill. They fit a checkbox. You know, we can make this because it fits this, whatever. Or they had a scene in mind. We need a giant monster to inflict some damage. What giant monsters are out there? We got a praying mantis from Shock Street. Oh, that will work. Let's do that. You know what I mean? Like, it just feels like that's the conclusions they came to. They didn't make it because they cared, sadly. But yeah. Now going off,
And
I'm gonna go off what Micah said from memory as best as possible. It could be inaccurate here, but Micah, he mentioned that this was one of the first things he encountered with Goosebumps. He watched this when he was younger, and he gave some insight that he still appreciates the movie today, despite his flaws. And I think some of his flaws are kind of what we touched on. I can't remember the exact specifics, but Micah was a bit more nicer to it, I feel, than we are. You know what I mean? And I'm surprised that Spongy is seemingly like kind of on the same boat as us about it. But unless you have anything you want to add to that, we can move on to Jumanji.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is I like the fact that Spongy brought up that you can tell by the way that the monsters were handled that it wasn't really the most invested people that were fans of Goosebumps because, again, studio meddling was probably a thing because, like you said, they brought up the safest monsters. Because the two things you could have done with the movie is you could have done what Completionist said, where you take all the Hallmark monsters, the stuff that was chosen for the Goosebumps 2023 show, Cuckoo Clock, Haunted Mass, Say Cheese and Die, all those things, and you could have made it. Or if you did want to go obscure, they did choose monsters from Give Yourself Goosebumps. There's plenty of obscure monsters in Give Yourself Goosebumps that work great for a movie, that are scary, that are adventurous, that do good things. So you could have actually promoted Give Yourself Goosebumps with the movie if you wanted to take your own liberty. But choosing the safest monsters is sort of like when you open up a pack of Jolly Ranchers. You got the blue raspberry, which is the hallmark. Everybody loves that. You got the more weirder flavors of Jolly Ranchers, and then you got grape and green apple. And they chose grape and green apple for this movie, man. It is the safest, most digestible thing. Nothing too special, nothing too great. But you know what? If you're a fan of it at the end of the day, don't take what we said as bashing. We are just old heads who grew up with the old stuff, and we're looking at it from that lens. If you started with Goosebumps 2015 and now you're in love with the entire series, shout out to you. So you're entitled to however you feel.
Yeah, I like the Jolly Rancher comparison for that, but I think it does fit. Honestly, I don't think anything we've said so far about 2015 is out of line. I think most people who have kind of a like a neutral mind on this will see what we said and at least can agree with it in some capacity, whether you're more forgiving on it or not. It is what it is, you know. But let's move on to Jumanji because I feel like we've spoken enough about 2015 here. Jumanji, the film that kind of I want to say it was kind of the first of its kind because there are similar 90s and even 80s movies that kind of feel like this. Um, the earliest example I can think of this Jumanji like phenomenon is something like the Monster Squad by I think Fred Decker in the 1980s, where you have a bunch of universal monsters coming to life in the real world, and kids have to stop it. You know, we see this trope go back further, but Jumanji was really the first big box office smash, revolutionary film that wasn't really marketed as horror, but many kids thought was frightening back in the day and associated with horror to the point where we saw kids' horror, which was actually thriving in its glory days in 1995 at that point, start to really think like maybe we should try board game horror because Jumanji seems to be working. And then we saw Goosebumps. We got a story called The Haunted House Game. We saw, Are You Afraid of the Dark later make the Tale of the Forever game. We saw, the knockoffs try it. Like Your Turn to Scream is essentially Jumanji's ripoff, and there's plenty of other board game horror stuff around that time. Even kids' cartoon episodes were trying. Let's see what we can do with making a board game come to life. It was a whole phenomenon that worked and kind of birthed its own subgenre. But like I said, the formula goes back a little further. And you can even argue movies like Last Action Hero with Arnold Schwarzenegger about a movie star gets brought to life by a kid's wish, or I think something like that, and now he has to fight in the real world, and these things from the movie kind of blend in the real world. You can see that too. But like I said, Jumanji was the first to make it hugely mainstream. It spawned a cartoon show that was on, I think, UPN network back in the day. It's now lost to time, but back in the day, that was one of the more popular cartoons. Kids ate that crap up. A popular movie getting a cartoon back in the 90s was like the thing to do. It was the thing to experience. It was just product of its time, but it was immensely successful. And Jumanji was based on a book. People don't really know this. This is more deep cut. Surprisingly, not a lot of people know this. It was based on a kid's book, like a kid's picture book from 1981, written by Chris Van Allsburg of the same name, that is about kids uh, playing this game Jumanji, and the things come to life in the house, and they have to figure out how to stop it and beat the game, right? So if you want to even make a further tie back, maybe all those 80s movies were actually taking inspiration from Jumanji's book, which is fun. But that's beyond the point. Jumanji, on a film merit, I think is still a classic when we're talking about family movies. I think it's a top 10 contender of top 10, one of the top 10 best family movies ever made. It has the late, great Robin Williams starring in it. Robin Williams, he's an A-list actor. Rest in peace. The tragic story, what happened to him, but he gave it his all in this movie. And not only that, I think that this movie takes a lot of risks, especially for the 90s, but even today I think it still holds up for the risks it takes. And it goes darker and it goes a little more thought provoking with its story and its ideas it has to present. The concept is about a board game that we see in the epilogue of the movie. These kids in New Hampshire, it's a dark and stormy night in the 1800s. They're carrying with them this crate that is beating like drums inside of it, and you're like, what's going on here? And the kids are like, we need to get rid of this thing. This thing's a damnation to humanity. We need to bury it so people never have to come across its evil. And we're like, what are they talking about? And it's like getting you hooked into the mystique of it all. And then we get a cut to 1969 in the town, which would be like, I guess at that point 80 or maybe almost 100 years into the future. And we see this boy named Alan Parrish riding his bike through this town of New Hampshire, and we see these statues of his ancestors. We see a shoe factory that his father runs, and his father's shoe factory supplies most of the jobs town. He's a part of a family that has, I guess celebrity factors going on in their town. Some kids don't like that about him and bully him because he's part of that famous lineage. So they try to chase him down one day. He goes to his father's factory, and there we meet this worker who's played by David Allen Greer, who has this, at the time, cutting edge basketball shoe design. And because he's hiding out from the bullies outside of the factory, he doesn't pay much attention to where he leaves the shoe, and it causes this accident within the warehouse. And as he leaves, he sees the aftermath of what his father is about to do to this worker, and the worker's accepting punishment. But Alan gets beat up by these bullies, and his bike is stolen. And that's when he hears the beating that we heard in the epilogue. And he goes to this area on the property of the factory, and he follows the sound, and he digs up through the earth, and he finds the crate. He opens the crate up, and inside is a very ornate, beautiful looking, you know, box, essentially, with the words Jumanji on it. And it's revealed that this Jumanji thing later on is actually a board game, as Alan comes to discover. So Alan takes it home. He is trying to hide his, beating from the bullies from his parents, but his parents catch on. And his parents get this bright idea to ship him to boarding school, maybe to save his own hide, but to also carry out family tradition. And Alan has a falling out with his parents over this, and he tries to run away. But before he can run away, he's visited by his friend Sarah, and Sarah hears the drumming inside of the house, and they decide to play the board game together. Well, when they decide to play the board game, they learn very quick that this game is not like any other board game they ever played. When they touch the pieces and put them on the board, they instantly run to a spot on the board like magic. And when they roll the dice, there's a magic orb in the middle of the game that tells you something, and if you read it aloud, it brings something into the real world. And these things might be creatures of this world known as Jumanji. Well, um, once something happens with Sarah, Alan accidentally rolls, and he finds himself sucked into the board game. And he is, quite graphically, even for its time, is shown going like, he's screaming, and he's being sucked into this board game. Of course, this freaks out Sarah. She runs off as these bats chase her out of the house. And then we get a cutaway to the modern day of 1995, and we get a big recontextualization. After 26 years, the house that Alan grew up with is been abandoned. It's disheveled. Some stuff from his childhood and from the former family that lived there are still there, But there's a new family coming in. There's a woman and her niece and nephew, the niece and nephew are Judy and Peter. They are moving into the house after Judy and Peter have lost their parents in a tragic accident, and they're trying to set up shop here because they got a good deal on it and they can make a new life. Well, as the story goes along and Judy and Peter are kind of exploring the house, they end up finding the Jumanji board game that was stashed up in the attic, and they start to play it. And after they start to play it, they may or may not release Alan from his purgatory. And this kicks off the rest of the movie, where Alan, he comes back to the forefront. He learns through, being told what happened and kind of, seeing it for himself, what the town he lived in as a child has become, and the tragic story of what happened to his parents, and uh, the gravity of all that. And he decides to play the game to put it to rest. But he realizes there's a fourth player that is not in the picture, and that is Sarah. He reunites with Sarah. Alan and Sarah see that they have been separated for so long, but they have some similarities in how they felt isolated for all these years because of what happened that fateful night. And throughout the movie, we see a bunch of different creatures and even a being known as Fan Belt come out of this game. And we see a couple, things like monkeys performing hijinks on this police officer who is played by David Allen Greer, who was the guy with the basketball shoe early on in the story. And we see hijinks with that. We see stampedes of elephants, zebras. We see a lion, giant spiders. We see a giant plant shoot vines at people, and there's some great prosthetic work with that. We see a character turn into a monkey, and there's some prosthetic work with that too. It's pretty horrifying stuff, I should say, even for that time. Um, and of course, it keeps ramping up and ramping up and ramping up as the story goes along, as they have to chase the board game to keep it on their possession, keep it from this guy who's trying to take it and have leverage to kill Alan or something like that. I mean, it's a wild, bonkers story, has plenty of adventure moments, but at the heart of it, it's a story about learning to appreciate what you do have in life, and not taking those things for granted, and also about, if you're given a second chance, you should take it and run with it. And that message is all the more clear by the time you get to the after point of the climax, where we see Alan and Sarah um, end up, and then what happens to Judy and Peter. I don't want to spoil it because it's quite touching, but all in all, yeah, I think Jumanji is, like I said, it's one of the greatest family movies ever made. Period. I think the character writing of Alan and Sarah is poignant. Both of their characters, after the experiences they had in the beginning of the movie, we see them have different paths. But the movie spends time, especially with Alan, touching on to what happened to him that day, the trauma he was holding, the regret he was feeling once he came back to the real world. And then we saw this mission of him throughout the story of how he wanted to end this. And then especially by the end, how he's come full circle is now he feels like he owes it to his friends for freeing him, to free them of the torment that they're in their own reality, in this alternate timeline that he and Sarah created by playing Jumanji all those years ago. And I think that the storytelling aspect is poetic, even for like Judy and Peter's character, who don't really tie all that much thematically to the story like Alan and Sarah do. But I do think those two characters, the biggest benefit they have in the story is freeing Alan, because by freeing Alan, he's going to be able to help them be freed of, the trauma they faced before the events of the story took place, which I think is beautiful in its own right. I think the acting and the jokes in this movie are pretty much all across the board spectacular. There's some good funny bits that really do land. There's no real dated humor in this movie. You would think that maybe a 90s movie might have some mild dated things, but no, it's mostly held up very well. The CGI is actually pretty decent at some points, even though it's horrendous in some other points. Like the monkeys are really awful, but it's kind of held up. I wish this movie would get a remaster on that, but it's fair for a '95 movie that didn't have the effects budget like a Jurassic Park, but it's comparable for the time, I guess. I do think the prosthetic work looks very frightening. I think the scene with the plant specifically and all the insect stuff was top notch, top-notch stuff. Like you had these mosquitoes drilling through a windshield. That was pretty good looking. But my favorite thing is the plant with the vines and how it shoots out and it tries to get Peter in that one scene. That's still tense, and that's really good stuff. Um, Favorite scene, one of the scariest moments I think in film history. It scarred me as a kid, is seeing Alan being sucked into that board game. As dated as the CGI can be in that, it looks really good. So I think this movie actually executes horror better than some kids' horror books. So take that for what you will. Um, the setting of a small town, it felt like a small town in New Hampshire. It felt like New England. It felt like Alan came from an affluent family. The house, the story mainly is set in, is a mansion. So it's fun. You see a bunch of different parts of that. Um, Van Pelt, which is one of the, I guess, side villains or the main villain of the story, who's hunting down these characters like the Terminator. He is literally shooting guns at kids. That is metal. Okay, you don't see that in kids movies these days. You can call it edgy, you can call it edgelord, whatever, but that is hardcore, and I have to give the movie props for that. Yeah, really, when it comes down to it, I guess me and BD already brought this up before in the podcast, before we did this podcast. He brought up a fantastic point. I'm going to give you credit on this one. Um, there are some bits of the plot that feel just kind of tacked on in there, like the whole when we get to meet the cop later on in the movie. There's a whole arc that ties back to a point in the beginning where we see Alan kind of mess up his shoe design and ruin his dream. But none of that really matters by the end of the story. It feels like something that was throwaway and just inserted in there to have some sort of ripple between Alan and the police officer to allow Alan to be able to escape. It's never it like it's entirely inconsequential to what happens near the end of the story. We never see anything come of it. It feels like a waste to have it in there, but it could be worse, I guess. Like we already brought up, the CGI of the monkeys is booty. It's absolute booty. We can't get around it. We can't get around it. It is a little bit of a step up from some terrible Goosebumps CG, but not by much. It's absolute booty. And personally, the movie is about an hour and 40 minutes. A lot more people are more in tune with like the final hour of the movie, or seem to be more on board with that because that's the part of the movie that sticks out in people's memories more. This is where all the action takes place. The first 40 to 50 minutes, the movie takes its methodical time building up characters, building up exposition, building up a prologue to just set up the events in modern day. It does take its time. And because it lasts so long, I use this adjective. It's a bit tedious, but it's necessary. So it's not the biggest thing ever. Honestly, I probably give this movie like a 9 out of 10, 4.5 out of 5 stars. Maybe if I was on a better day, I might give it a 9.5, 4.75, or 4.7, I guess. But because of those flaws, I don't see myself necessarily being forgiving on them anytime soon. So I think in that range, I'm comfortable. So yeah, BD, I'm gonna pass it over to you now. What's your thoughts on Jumanji?
So since I only saw this movie when it reran as a kid and I was really little, so I barely remembered things about it. This was pretty much almost a first watch for me. There were things I recognized, but I was fully experiencing it for the first time as an adult. And I would give this movie a 9.5 out of 10. I think this is a Hall of Fame, just great movie overall. Some of the great things about this movie, Comp already covered, but I actually enjoy the pacing of the movie. I really wasn't bored at any point throughout it because I think the thing I appreciate about the first beginning part of it is you get to see different timelines and different connections established between characters and the worlds without it being exposition dump. So you get introduced to Alan, you find out he's from the affluent family, you see that he's being bullied because his dad is famous, because his family's famous and rich, so he gets picked on. And I like the fact that he's a disappointment to his father and his family line, because it's not your typical thing where a lot of the time with the rich families it's, oh, I don't want to be, part of the family business. That's there, but it's also because his dad is a very confident guy. His family has been successful because of the fact that they're sort of pioneers, that they're confident. This guy's a wimp. He gets scared a lot of the time. He doesn't have the strength or the guts to live up to, his popularity and confidence. So because of that, that's why he's a disappointment. And you see him start lashing out against his dad, and his dad in turn starts becoming distant with him. So that's really well done. I also like the fact that what happens with Alan and his family is tied to Judy and Peter, because unlike Alan, who had a very, loving and involved family, Judy and Peter have no family. It's the opposite, where they aren't in a good situation because they had middle class parents who died. So now they've been abandoned for a long time. They become eccentric for that reason. So you got that juxtaposition between the two characters. And a lot of the movie is really, really fun because once they start up the Jumanji game, first of all, I just got to say this, there is nothing more hype or something that'll hype you up in real life than tribal drums. Listen, tribal drums is used in a lot of media. If you ever heard tribal drums played in real life, that'll hype you up. So when you hear that the Jumanji theme is these tribal African drums that they're beating, it gets you hyped up. It gives this presence to the game and what's about to happen. So I really think that's a cool gimmick to it. And a lot of the creatures that come out of this game are pretty fun. The mosquitoes are terrifying. Mosquitoes alone are annoying. These giant mosquitoes attacking the vehicle reminded me of Stephen King's The Mist. If you've ever seen the movie The Mist, and you've read his book, they got killer flies in there that attack buildings and cars. So this reminded me of that. It was really cool to see. That obviously came before this, so I like the little connection between those. The lion is like a mix of, like, I think prosthetic and CGI, and the lion's really cool. It has a fantastic scene in the attic for the opening. The lion stepping on top of the piano and walking towards them, and then having the scene where its entire face and body's covered in shadow. Just the snout is peeking through the wall of shadow and snarling. That reminded me of Goosebumps in the Werewolf of Fever Swamp, because the Werewolf of Fever Swamp has an exact similar scene where the werewolf is covered by shadow, just the snout is snarling. So here, the fact that you got the lion stepping on top of the piano and doing that, that was really cool. It's got some good action scenes. There's a scene later in the climax where the entire mansion is falling apart and Alan is swinging on a vine and he accidentally runs into the lion who's on top of the railing slashing at him. That's all really cool. That's actually some example of good roller coaster stuff where it doesn't feel like that the roller coaster aspect is taking up the narrative. No, it's actually enhancing the action scenes and enhancing the viewer experience. So it's more so an addition. So I like that. You brought up the plants. The plants are fantastic. The vines are great. That giant carnivorous plant with the bright pink coming out is horrific because the thing had giant tarantula fangs over its giant lotus, which is what the f, like that's terrifying, dude. You see that and you're like, whoa, that's freaky, but that's cool. It's got that cool, exaggerated fantasy world of the jungle. Really well done stuff, and the fact that it's all practical. I love when they do good practical effects. That practical carnivorous plant was S tier. That was great. And another great scene in this movie, the crocodiles. That's the most intense scene to me because for those of you who don't know, the animal that scares me the most is crocodiles. I've always been scared of crocodiles and alligators. Just something about this prehistoric dinosaur in this murky water is horrific. And the scene of these giant crocs basically attacking them on top of the table, and they have to swing from the chandelier. And there's literally a scene where Peter falls into the water, and you're like, oh, it's over. The dude is finished. He's getting washed. But then, Alan jumps in and saves them. It's all really, really cool and well done. The monsters do have some weak effects at times. We mentioned the monkeys. The monkeys look horrible. I gave it a pass because it's 1995, but Jesus, they look really, really bad. The stampede of the rhinos and elephants look like something out of the Animal Kaiser arcade games, which I used to play as a kid. So, those are sort of iffy, but they're still well done. And honestly, the highlight of the whole movie is Robin Williams. Robin Williams does a fantastic job as Alan because as soon as he gets out of the board game, he all of a sudden is running around like a little kid. So you find out that, yeah, he's been trapped in isolation for 26 years. He's got the body of an adult, but he's got the mind of a kid because he's lost his childhood. He's still holding on to the fantasy that the world is the same way it was when he was a kid, which is no longer the truth. So he has to step up as an adult. He has to take a parental figure role, especially with Judy and Peter not having parents in their lives. And Sarah, shout out to Sarah. Sarah had some great acting points throughout this movie, and the idea of mental health being touched upon, where she basically is painted as a lunatic that went crazy, nobody believes her. So it's basically you gotta believe me done in a good way because there's no you gotta believe me in the story. It's all retroactive. It's all her saying, this is what happened in my life. I know this is crazy. I know this is a hallucination, but it's not. And she has to face her inner demons at the same time, Alan has to face his inner demons. So they connect off that. It's really well done. And the people who played Judy and Peter, great job. That was overall good as well. And Van Pelt, yeah, this movie is edgy, but I like edginess because, again, they did darker themes, they took more layers. And Van Pelt, taking in his blunderbuss and trading it in for a fully custom AA-12 with a suppressor was funny as hell. The fact that he's shooting at the kids in the target, it's like a scene out of an Adam Sandler movie. Van Pelt looks like David Spade's long lost grandfather, so it just adds to the humor of the scene despite its absurdity. And fun fact, the actor who plays Van Pelt, his name is Jonathan Hyde. Jonathan Hyde. The guy's last name is Hyde, so that's also a cool little thing where, that connects to his character. And yeah, overall, really good movie. And one thing I do want to touch upon is the ending of the movie is beautiful. And I'm not going to lie, I actually got teary eyed at the end of the movie because the ending of the movie is essentially Alan and Sarah get sent off back to when they were kids and they have to live out their entire lives, the 20 plus years married together. And they realize that in the future, they're probably going to see Judy and Peter. So they're going to see these kids in the future. They have to wait all those years until they can meet them because they owe their life to these kids. These kids saved them. And when they finally meet their kids, it's actually the happy ending for the kids. They have their parents back. And in turn, the kids don't recognize them. So that was actually bittersweet because they love the kids. They're sort of like the adoptive parents of the kids. But at the end of the day, they have to do what's right for the kids. They got to let them enjoy the lives of their parents. They got to give them some space. So that was sort of heartbreaking, but at the same time, it's very sweet. So overall, yeah, 9.5 out of 10. This is a Hall of Fame movie. I think this movie gets better with age because you'll appreciate a lot of things about it. And I think it's one of the best family movies of all time. So please go check it out. And for anybody who's saying that it's not kids horror, listen, there's stuff that's scarier in this movie than some kids horror episodes that me and Comp have watched and some books that we've read. So please go check it out if you're a kids horror fan.
Absolutely, absolutely. Have to completely endorse that as well. Before we get to Spongy, there's one more thing I want to add on that I think is also a testament to this movie. And I've seen some criticisms about this, and I kind of get this at the same time about this film. A lot of people wish that there was more backstory involving the Jumanji game itself. Like, where exactly did this thing come from? Because it has a hunter who looks like a European hunter that is implied that he would have been in like an African safari, maybe in like the early 1800s. And people are like, okay, well, how did this game come to be, right? Well, while that's not answered in the movie, and while that can be a detraction, what I think this movie does very well is it sticks to a lane of what the game is. This is a game that brings African safari animals and a whole world of Jumanji alive, and it does not deter from that. So, in a way, I feel like not knowing where it comes from is kind of made up for how well the story sticks in a lane with it. It doesn't venture too weird. It's not like it's like, oh, now we're bringing in, street bums from Chicago, or now we're, now we're bringing in prehistoric dinosaurs, pterodactyls and stuff. It doesn't go weird with it. It just sticks with African safari animals or stuff that would have been in Africa at a certain time. Like we got a historical safari guy. He somehow is in the game somehow. Your mind can wander where it came from, but like I said, I think the movie does a decent job to make you forget that that's even a thing. But what keeps it intriguing is the fact that this is a thing that is generational. Somebody finds it every 80 or so years, and it causes havoc, and they have to hide it away again. We even see Alan do the same thing once he finally fixes the timeline that he created and destroyed it. He got rid of the game, and it's like, all right, 80 years from now, whoever finds this, he left a note saying, "Beware, do not open this, don't do it." And he tossed it into the river, and said, this is my mark on the history of this game. And I think that's kind of a good way to send it off. And honestly, I think it works better as like a standalone movie. I think we also touched on this before the podcast. This idea, like if they wanted to make a sequel, I feel like you would have to dip into the mystique of it and all, and get into the answers of where it comes from and all that. But honestly, maybe sometimes you don't need to do that, especially when you have a concept that riveting, because you run the risk of trying to over explain, or you kind of lose sight of what it is and you start to venture out away from what it was. So there's that. But if you have anything you want to add, you can. If not, let's go to Spongy's thoughts.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think that the mystique of it is important because I think, like you mentioned, the one good thing this movie does is even though you don't see the world of the board game, because it's so consistent with the creatures and stuff that comes out of it, you can perfectly imagine what the world of the board game looks like on the inside. So your imagination, pretty much for a lot of people, can paint the same consistent image of like if you've seen the African Congo jungle, that's probably what it looks like in the inside. And for all I know, giant carnivorous plants with tarantula fangs probably does exist in the Congo because that's the most unexplored part of the African jungle. So you can kind of paint a similar image, and I think that it's funny that as we talk about this, it keeps reminding me of Stephen King's The Mist because in Stephen King's The Mist, there's all these interdimensional creatures that start coming out of the mist and start attacking people. And even though you never find out, what exactly is in the mist, it's implied that it's a bridge to a parallel world, a parallel dimension, and that the monsters come out of it. You can imagine what the world might look like. And because it's consistent with the kind of horrific things that come out, that makes the mystique effective. And I think it works in the same way Jumanji does, because Jumanji, yeah, you don't know the origins, but you can pretty much consistently guess it, and there's no real shocking stuff in it. Now, if a Terminator robot came out, then we need a lore dive. But we didn't get that. We got Van Pelt, the human Terminator.
Yeah, and even like I said, Van Pelt feels on brand. I mean, it feels like he would have been in an African safari somewhere. Maybe if we want to dive into the mind, maybe this board game was created by a group of people and made this character, or cursed him to be in the game because he killed somebody or something, and this is his damnation that he has to live with for eternity now. Who knows? But that's kind of the fun sometimes. Unlike something like, cut and dry, like a book, where things just happen and there's no explanation because things just happen. Things happen in this book, but there's causation and there's believability because it's consistent. It's consistent with it, so it's fine. Like it's all it is like a magical board game that brings stuff out of it. There's African safari theme. That's all you need to know, I guess. But I can kind of understand if you want to know more, because if you're a fan, those are things that you want to know. You know what I mean? So I get it, but anyways, let's get to Spongy's thoughts because I'm curious and I also want to see which one wins.
All right, let me read Spongy's thoughts, and I also got the links to Micah's messages on Discord, so I'll read his thoughts as well. All right, so for Spongy's thoughts, some of this is taken from my Jumanji versus Zathura blog post, so he links that. I didn't actually grow up with this movie, so I don't have nostalgia to blind, but as it is, I do like it. There are some issues. It takes too long to get to the actual leads, as there's a small opening with the game being buried, then the backstory of Alan, which I feel didn't need to go on as long as it did. Some of the CGI hasn't aged well, and the main kids are kind of bland, but it's still a fun adventure with Robin Williams being the best part. And I'm not saying that because of Robin Williams. He's arguably the lead character, as he's the one who goes through an arc. He learns a lesson about facing your fears and has a thing with his dad and kind of getting that one guy fired. He's more toned down here. So despite some of the wonky effects and pacing, it's good and holds up well enough. Yeah, not much to say on this one. Those are his thoughts, and then let me get to Micah's thoughts. So these are some of Micah's thoughts that he let us know. So he said, yeah, he mentioned the fact that the effect of Alan getting sucked into the game always freaked him out as a kid. The effects are pretty dated, but that makes them even creepier sometimes, in his opinion. Plus, he thought the music was horrifying. Um, and then he said that the whole aspect of Alan's character growing up as a middle-aged man in this violent world, and now he gets to reset his life, says it adds some tragedy to his character that ends in a great payoff. And then he finally gives his thoughts about who he thinks wins. So I guess we can get into that if you want me to start.
Yeah. With that being said, let's start off with Micah's thoughts, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So Micah said that in his opinion, he gives the win to Goosebumps 2015. He says just for sheer entertainment value, because even though it's flawed and it takes a while to get going, he has more fun with it than he does Jumanji. He also says there's a bit more novelty to Goosebumps 2015. You get to see the actual Goosebumps monsters brought to life instead of just generic safari animals. And then he says that he had a lot of nostalgia for 2015. He saw it twice in theaters and he was insanely hyped as a kid for it. So he basically tends to judge media more often than not on entertainment value for his own experience than writing story characters, which is respective. Entertainment value is important. So those are his thoughts. Then I'll get into Spongy's. So he says
Yeah,
that these are roughly on the same level. Both are good, but nothing great to me. Goosebumps has some notably funny parts with Jack Black and is funnier, more quotable overall, with more consistently decent effects. But the heart in Jumanji hits a bit better, mostly due to Robin Williams. I can see someone swinging either way based on their nostalgic experiences mostly, since both have pros and cons, as Jumanji does have the basic leads and mild pacing issues here and there. In the end, I'll pick Jumanji. I've seen the Goosebumps movie more and I'm more attached to it, but Jumanji feels more consistent when it comes to the script and heart. Neither are perfect, but there's my pick. I don't know if you'll be surprised with that or not. Also, Zathura is better than both, as in Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. Next Level was good, but lesser than the previous. So those are Micah's thoughts and Spongy's thoughts.
you know, I'm kind of shocked on Spongy's thoughts, but like I totally get where Micah and Spongy are coming from because I think the Goosebumps movie it applies to fan service, and as a Goosebumps fan, and like Micah pointed out, the novelty of it being themed Goosebumps, it speaks more on your heartstrings if you're into that stuff more. And I guess entertainment value also stems down to interest at the end of the day. Can something hold your interest? That it's subjective at the end of the day. Does it please you? Does it not please you? That aside, I think both movies in terms of pace, they're kind of even to me. They have like I think 2015's, it has a very, very slow, boring start, and it does take a while to kind of click on to what it becomes. But when it does click on, it's a fun little roller coaster ride of a movie. But like you said, I think you hit the nail on the head with this, BD. 2015, these events, they're not being, they're not accentuations of story. They're just events for the sake of plot, and the plot takes them to these events because the movie is trying to build these events as spectacles and not trying to build a story around it necessarily. It's just like it's happening. As in Jumanji, there's a story going on while these events are happening, right? You have an objective, right? It's more clear in Jumanji. The objective is we got to finish this game. We got to reach Jumanji so we can all have closure. There's a message of closure for all these characters. For Judy and Peter, it's closure. They want to end this nightmare that they've walked into, but they don't see the added benefit that becomes a little more clear as we see in the end with Peter, not with Peter, but Alan and Sarah. For Alan and Sarah, this is putting 26 years of trauma that they both had to endure on their own. Alan being stuck in the world of Jumanji and Sarah being stuck in this town where she's been ostracized and called, pretty much insane for all these years. And she's kind of hidden away like a recluse, like she's isolated her own self. So you have these two very similar adults who once were best friends that have grown up all these years isolated from each other, but are also isolated to everyone else. So, in a way, this is putting closure to that trauma, like I said. So there's methods to wanting to finish this game, and I feel like in terms of nuance, I feel like the events of Jumanji, while they can be kooky and random, they do serve parts of the plot. Like if the monkey steals a cop car, it's going to play a factor when the cop runs into the aunt later in the plot. Even though we didn't hardly touch on the aunt might as well not have been in the movie. But still, it has setup and payoff to when the car inevitably gets eaten by vines, or you have these events going on in the town where they go to the supermarket and they interact with Van Pelt. Well, he gets an upgraded gun that makes him more menacing and makes him more of a threat. So that's why they have to go back to the house, which has already been taken over essentially by the board game, even though it's more unsafe in the house than it is out in the real world. They do that to get away from this psychopath. So there's consequences that impact plot. As in terms of Goosebumps 2015, these events, they're just random. Like they'll be in a house and the lawn gnomes come to life and chase them out of the house. Boo hoo! All right, so now where are we going with this? Do the lawn gnomes matter after this point of the story? No, you don't see them again, right? In Jumanji, the lion gets activated and you see the lion throughout the house in the remainder of the movie. We see the vines; they matter later on in the movie. They all stick around. They all have a sense of purpose of why they're in the story. It makes more sense writing wise. I think the themes are better in Jumanji. The characters are better. I don't know where really Spongy's coming at with the generic Judy and Peter. I guess he's going off the 90s trope of orphaned kids or kids without parents. Yeah, I can see that, but they're not that generic. I think they're better. It's less goofy. It's a little more serious. It's a bit darker. It takes more risks. It's scarier. In my opinion, it's a better movie. Yeah, you can knock it for being generic animals coming to life, but I think still, despite that, it executes it better than Goosebumps as a fan service movie, which is saying a lot as a Goosebumps fan. So I'm giving the win to Jumanji here. What about you,
Well,
B?
I can give my thoughts. I'm just gonna be flat out honest. The difference between 2015 Goosebumps and Jumanji 1995 is like if you had to choose to be attacked by a German Shepherd or a grizzly bear. They both hit you hard, but the differences in the levels of hard is miles apart. Jumanji is that grizzly bear where it is souped up, it is better in pretty much every department, and dogs and bears are similar to each other. They got similar behaviors, similar builds. 2015 is a ripoff of Jumanji. They got similar builds, but the leagues to them is on different pedestals. So the thing that Jumanji 1995 does so well, first of all, the characters. The characters in Jumanji 1995 absolutely blow the characters in 2015 out of the water. Hands down, that's just flat out the truth if you look at it from a narrative standpoint. Alan is very much R.L. Stine. Alan is flat out the parallel R.L. Stine is made to in the 2015 movie, because R.L. Stine's whole thing is these books are his entire childhood. They've plagued his childhood. His monsters coming to life thing is something he has to put closure to. Alan's whole thing, he's been in 20 plus years of isolation in the jungle. He has to put closure to this. And the difference is Alan's whole thing with the way it's solved, though the ending to the movie is brilliant. The fact that they get sent back in time, the fact that they have to grow up their entire lives under this brand new fantasy timeline, waiting for the day that they're going to meet the kids who saved their lives. And when they do meet them, it's bittersweet. It's not what they expected because the kids don't recognize them. But this is the fruits of their labor. This is what they signed up for. And at the end of the day, that's the positive outcome for the kids. The fact that they grow up with their original parents. Yeah, you might feel selfish inside. You might be like, oh man, I wish we could have adopted these kids. I wish they would know how much they mean to us. But at the end of the day, if we can make their lives better, that's enough satisfaction for us. And Alan settles with the fact of, you know what? Our mi casa is your casa. You can come anytime you want. That's the closure to the story. 2015 Goosebumps. What? They put all the things back in the books, and then Hannah fake dies, and then comes back 2 scenes later. Get out of here, dude. That doesn't compare to Jumanji 1995. I mean, the layers of the ending in Jumanji 1995 parallels two timelines together and merges them together. You don't got anything on that level in 2015. 2015 is again a roller coaster. It's taking you event to event, much like a video game. You're going checkpoint to checkpoint. Jumanji is a well woven movie. Everything plays into each other and works out really well. If you look at Alan Duchette's character or Alan character, bro, Alan, he spent 20 plus years in Jumanji's jungle, and you see throughout the movie that he's an expert. He understands everything because he comes with the turtle on the back. He's like a Tarzan figure. When the monkeys come up, he knows exactly what to do. He knows how to make monkey calls and scare them away from the house. When it comes to the crocodile, it's a small point, but he tells Sarah, "Oh no, it's not an alligator because crocodiles got ridges on their eyes." He knows because he's been dealing with these crocodiles for 20 plus years. Van Pelt. Van Pelt is so scary because effectively Alan has conquered all the animals. It's just this hunter who's always bested him and always targeted him as prey. So that's why he's so scared of him because he's been dealing with this guy for all these years. What does Arlstein do in Goosebumps? He just goes, "Oh, I remember when I wrote this book. Ding. Oh, this is the title of the book. Ding." When they're in the haunted car, he goes, "I don't remember writing about a praying mantis." And then the praying mantis vomits on the windshield, and he goes, "Now I remember." Is that as clever as Jumanji? No, it's just fanfic, and it's forced fanfic at certain points. The Graveyard Ghouls is completely fabricated. The Praying Mantis is fabricated lore, and fans would basically recognize that it's not true, so it's weaker. And I don't know. I just feel like Jumanji as a whole, it just outclasses 2015, even though the fact that it's an original. So I give it the win. I think that this is a Hall of Fame movie, and I think that Goosebumps 2015 should have honestly done more to be more like Jumanji if they wanted a more standout movie. But those are my thoughts. And in terms of the monsters, listen, yeah, the Goosebumps monsters are more iconic. At least the Jumanji animals don't take up one frame. At least they got actual scenes where they're interacting with the characters and causing problems. Not like freaking Bozo the Clown from that one GYG book, oh, number 42, that's in the background of one still frame. No, that's not the same thing. So, yeah, more iconic, sure, better executed, Jumanji. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and before we get into our discussion, I think to declare a victor on this, I think comes down. I think it's kind of easy. I think we're going to give the win to Jumanji here. But I think where it comes down to is not only was Jumanji kind of first, when I say there's Jumanji clones, I'm mainly referring to Columbia or TriStar movies that are owned by Sony, right? So these go back to Sony. I don't know if they own the companies at the time, but you look at those two film companies, they put out um, Jumanji, Sathura, Goosebumps 2015, Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween, all these movies that feel similar to that first movie. You can't help but see, like, they had an idea, and Chris Van Allensburg, I think that's the author's name, Allsburg, he wrote the kids' book. He was also part of the story writing team on Jumanji, and he helped bring that idea to the writers and said, "Hey, look, this is my idea, but I have faith in you guys to take it and do something else with it." And they took that idea from that picture book, they expanded on it. That whole first half was not in the book. They added that onto the character Alan, who is the main character of the book, and they made it a whole different story, kind of modernizing it for the 90s crowd, but also making it more dynamic at the same time. And what are some of the best kids' horror stories out there? The more dynamic ones, like a Haunted Mass 2 episode, where you have two distinct character arcs going on and two narratives that you can honestly see. You see Alan's narrative in this movie, and you see Judy and Peter's narrative, and they both coalesce into the final act, and it both has emotional weight and impact by the end in their own weird resolutive ways. It's kind of pitch perfect on that. Goosebumps doesn't have that. 2015 just doesn't have it. It's a fun spectacle movie. It's a fan service movie at the heart of it. Yes, as a Goosebumps fan, this is kind of an awesome movie in some regards. But is it as good as Jumanji in terms of writing? Nowhere near. Is it as good as acting? Arguably, but nowhere near, in my opinion. Is the concept better? Sure. Is the effects better? Sure. But I think everything else, with talking about the horror, the soundtrack, the practical effects, Jumanji wins. And if we want to get down to smaller things, they're mostly congruent. So yeah, I think Jumanji handily wins. So with the discussion, since it's just me and you tonight, BD, um, what is your thoughts on Jumanji's lasting impact on film, and what do you think that is?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about it before we started the podcast episode, but I think that while Jumanji, the original concept, is like a great thing, and it does have the potential to lead to very fun movies. Like one of my favorite movies of all time that I've watched a million times as a kid is Zathura. Zathura is very blatantly as much of a Jumanji ripoff as you can get, but it took a different approach where it had two brothers as the sort of storyline and dealing with a future version of the brother that got locked in the game. So you got parallel timelines between the two main characters. And the idea of it taking place in space offered a brand new, unique thing. They did the same thing as Jumanji, where they went for horror. You had killer robots, you had asteroid belts, you had these Zorgon reptilian aliens that had a lot of creepy things that were herding three-eyed goats and stuff. Really crazy stuff. So I like the fact that there's been good executed versions of that. But the problem with Jumanji, and this applies to other movies as well, is there's only so much you can do with it. And when you keep dragging out the concept and keep repeating it so much, eventually it becomes too much to digest. It's like, okay, let's say if you had whatever, your favorite restaurant, you ever discovered for the first two times in the same week. You're gonna be like, okay, yeah, this is really, really good. I really, really enjoy it. Now imagine you had to eat at that same place for seven times a week, or you had to eat that at that place for even more than that. Eventually you're gonna be like, all right, we need to start trying something new. Like this is getting way too repetitive. I'm getting bored. There's more diverse stuff out there. That's Jumanji, the concept. Because at the end of the day, with Goosebumps 2015, yeah, it has a completely different aesthetic to the movie. It's got its own unique franchise, Goosebumps, that it had a ton of material to draw from. But it's sort of like playing Fortnite with the John Wick skin, or a Naruto skin, or a Goku skin. Yeah, you got the skins different, but it's still Fortnite. The gameplay is Fortnite. Everything about it is still Fortnite. It's just got a different skin. Goosebumps had so much material, so much scripts that got thrown into the trash or thrown into the Smithsonian that never met the light of day. So what they decided to choose was the safe option, which is fine, but it's very much wasted potential. And it's the same thing, not just with Jumanji, because if you guys think we're bashing Jumanji, there's plenty of other movies out there that the concepts got drawn out that eventually people just thought it got too much, WTF. Fast and Furious. Fast and Furious, they could only do so much with it for the first couple of movies, and now they're going to space. Now they got convertible car submarines. Even Laz Alonso, who plays a character on The Boys, who was in the first Fast and Furious movie, he even said in a recent interview for season 4 of The Boys that, yeah, I got to be on Fast and Furious before they did all the crazy shit. So everybody knows that. Jurassic Park. Yeah, you go into a park where it has prehistoric dinosaurs. Cool. What's all the sequel movies? The same thing, just with different dinosaurs or some tweaked stuff in between. Jurassic World. It's not just a park. It's not just Disney Park. And no, now it's Disney World. Jurassic World is even bigger and better than ever. Oh, now what's going to happen? What if the dinosaurs escape into the real world? That's what ended up happening. And what happened with Jumanji? What happened with Jumanji? Jumanji, things were coming out of the game. What is the remakes with Dwayne Johnson and Jack Black in them? They enter the game. It turned into Journey to the Center of the Earth. That's what it turned into, which is what everybody expected. So the concept is narrow, the concept is repetitive. Yeah, you can do different stuff involving it, but try something new. Because listen, if you try something new, maybe it might not get the best reception at times, but at least you put your foot forward and you pave a way for something. Think about Creepshow. Do you know how experimental the first Creepshow movie was? how experimental it was with the anthology horror, how much risk it was taking. When you got Stephen King, George Romero, and Greg Nicotero tied to a movie, and it turns out to be anthology of five completely unrelated stories, people are like, what the F? Like, yo, people in the executive studio were probably like, are you sure this is going to work? Why don't you guys just make one cohesive story? What happened? It ended up being an iconic movie. Ended up being one of the best horror movies of all time. And it completely pushed the envelope for how well anthology horror can do. Now, when people make anthology horror, they always reference the Creepshow movie as to being the staple of why it can work. That's what you could have done with Goosebumps. If Goosebumps would have taken a different route with the books, they could have used the books in a different way for the movie. That would have affected the 2023 Goosebumps show. They would have tried doing something different other than, oh my God, the stuff from the, whatever is coming to life. I mean, they did something different there, but you can't lie. It did have a Jumanji feel, even in the 2023 show, especially since Rob Letterman is tied to it. So it's got similar stuff. So that's sort of my thoughts. I think that, you should try new things. If they fall flat, at least you tried. And taking the safe route just ends up motivating Hollywood to keep rinsing and repeating the same stuff. And in terms of entertainment, you don't get much out of that. Listen, you could love the 2015 movie. It's not unique. It's about as generic as you can get. Now compare that to the George Romero Deadhouse movie we could have got that the script is online. You could find the script. It never brought the light of day, but it was George Romero taking the Deadhouse story and making it into a movie with his own spin on it. He was going to take his own spin on the concept. And it's George frickin' Romero. The dude is the zombie master. He would have done something a lot darker, a lot deeper, and that's what the script showed. It never saw the light of day. People hate on Haunted Halloween. Goosebumps Haunted Halloween, for the first half of it, is an amazing Slappy story. For all of you Slappy fans out there, I get that he's overplayed, but you can't lie. Some of his best portrayal is at Haunted Halloween. It's got a whole thing going on where Slappy wants a family. He's sinister. He's dark. The kids are not your generic kids. The kid is a nerd. He makes a Tesla tower. He's into science. That's cool. And then you got the second half, which is Halloween Town. Halloween Town is its own thing. Yeah, it sort of spoofs Jumanji, but at least they took a different aspect to it. But guess what? People hated on the movie. So because people hated on the movie, all the executives are like, all right, I guess we should just stick to Jumanji in the future. There you go. But that's sort of my thoughts about it. I just think that playing it too safe is not always the best route, and I suspect that you have similar thoughts to me.
Yeah, I will say this, and I have pretty much a short and sweet statement here about it. Jumanji's legacy is the money it made. At the end of the day, studio, like, I'm mainly talking about Sony here. I'm mainly talking about this because Goosebumps, at least the film rights, are owned by Sony. Okay, Scholastic, partners with them. Jumanji made a lot of money, made a splash. And what do studios, even Disney does this these days? What do they try to milk all the time? They try to milk the things that sell, right? They try to milk it and milk it and milk it. We've seen it with Star Wars. We've seen it now with Halloween. I mean, Hollywood's done this for years. But with Jumanji in specifics, Hollywood realizes that Jumanji has some nostalgia. That's why we have the reboot movies. But they also tried something different, at least with Welcome to the Jungle and Next Level. So I can kind of commend that, but they're also looking at some other things that have come out, and they're like, well, you know what the first movie didn't do? It's by putting them in a otherworldly adventure. You know what? Let's look at the other movies that came out. Journey to the Mystery of the Earth. They had a sequel with Dwayne the Rock Johnson. Hey, why don't we put Dwayne the Rock Johnson in a Jumanji remake, Welcome to the Jungle? We essentially make that movie, but it's Jumanji. And because it's modern kids, let's put them in a video game. Yeah. Thumbs up their butts. They don't know what they're doing. They're just doing this to cash grab on impressionable kids that they think will eat the same crap over and over and over again. Because in all reality, kids do this. When they consume media and they like something, they constantly look for things similar, whether they want to admit it or not. We're kids horror fans. At the end of the day, we might like different, but we're all still looking for that niche, right? Everybody has that. Well, Jumanji's problem is you already brought up, it's really only interesting as a one and done concept. And if you keep repeating it over and over and over again with the same build, the same trope, it's not one of those concepts that can differ all too much. You can go to McDonald's and get a four-piece chicken nugget, and you can try any new limited edition dipping sauce to make those nuggets pop. But at the end of the day, if you hit those things bare, it is just McDonald's chicken nuggets. It's never going to change. It does not change the flip. It doesn't change how that tastes by itself. Okay. With that being said, that's Jumanji in a nutshell. It's that four-piece chicken McNugget from McDonald's, and the theme or whatever ideas you want to put them in space, Zathura, that's just your buffalo sauce. Your Jumanji is your barbecue. Your Goosebumps is your honey mustard, but you still got the chicken nugget that you're eating. Right? It's the same story, same concept, similar concept. Some are better than the others because of writing and actual care. And I think Zathura also had Chris Van Allsburg write a book, which is kind of like, his answer to Jumanji that he wrote back in 81. He wrote that around the time that movie came out, and he was also tied to Zathura as well. Maybe that's more of a sign that Chris Van Allsburg, when he's tied to something, make better movies than people like Rob Letterman, who don't get the IP that they're adapting, and they only look at the dollar signs and the marketability. Like choosing Slappy as your mascot. Hey, we need somebody to carry the film as the main villain, because Jumanji had that with Van Pelt, Zathura had that with the robot. We need this to be Slappy, you know? And that's literally what Slappy became in the movie. I mean, you can see those parallels. And at the end of the day, we see, because of Goosebumps 2015, you saw how Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween ended up unfair. Like, and I do see the unfair treatment that movie gets, but it does do it to itself because it tries to lean back on the safety net and the comfortability that these producers don't want to stray away from. Even ripoffs from Netflix, like The Curse of Bridge Hollow, guilty of this. They're trying to cash grab on Jumanji because there's still some sort of relevance to it in the formula, because it still makes money. And I can't really knock film studios like Sony for doing this, but at the end of the day, it just kind of shows to me that they don't have any faith in newer ideas. And when they do stuff like this, like Goosebumps 2015, it makes me feel bittersweet inside, because as a Goosebumps fan, I appreciate it, but also on the same token, as a Jumanji fan, I feel like, why are we making another Jumanji? You know what I mean? Why can't that movie have its own legacy? Now I feel like when everybody talks about Jumanji these days, they're only talking about it for two reasons. One, because Robin Williams is in it, and Robin Williams had a tragic, death, or they're talking about it out of nostalgia and how it birthed a bunch of movies like it. And that's just real talk. But sadly, that's my viewpoint on Jumanji, and you know, it is what it is, I guess. This is just a phenomenon to comment on. You have anything else you want to add, BD, before we close?
I think we covered everything thoroughly, so I think we can wrap it up.
All right, nice. So, thank you all for hanging out with us. That was episode 25. For our episode 26, we are going to venture off into some Haunting Hour versus Are You Afraid of the Dark. Again, so we're taking a mild break from Goosebumps for this next one. We decided to go with um, models, and specifically with models, is that the vainness of beauty and it being taken away from you, but in like the story would imply, there's a cost with beauty and a cost with vanity. So we decided to go with the classic Haunting Hour fan favorite episode, Headshot, and we're going to be facing it off against a lesser known season 7 Are You Afraid of the Dark episode known as The Tale of Many Faces. So stay tuned for that. I want to thank you, BD, for joining me tonight. I know we had a smaller panel, but I think we made a pretty dynamic episode out of this, given the circumstances. And I'll put everybody's information down in the description and the comment section of this video. You can go find Spongy stuff, Micah stuff, BD stuff, my stuff. And at your own leisure. If you like this video, please drop a like, please drop a subscribe. I have a playlist of all the Goose Junkies episodes on this channel if you would like to catch up on the oldest or even most recent ones that you haven't watched before. We will appreciate that as well. And let us know down in the comment section, all said and done, uh, what do you think is better? Do you think Goosebumps 2015 is better, or do you think Jumanji 1995 is better? We're dying to know, and we hope to see you next time, everyone. Take care. Have a good night.
Deuces.